Ron with GrowLens, and today I'm going to talk about how to 2x your indoor cultivation over the next 12 months. So before I want to hop into it, I wanted to highlight Ronnie of Astoria Growers. He has a beautiful indoor cultivation that he was able to increase production 110% in only 12 months. Also want to highlight Shizana, who has a indoor cultivation in Oklahoma, who was able to increase her productivity 300% in just 6 months. Last but not least, I want to highlight Robert Dumble from Dumble Industries, who also has a cultivation facility, we were able to help save $54,000 a year by taking tasks that took him weeks and reducing that just to a few hours. So, before we hop into it, who's this presentation for? So this presentation is for the cultivation owner-operator who's invested $250K or more in their grow facility and looking to maximize the return on investment. This is for the person who had a build out that took longer and might have been more costly than was expected and really need to guarantee their return so their facility doesn't go under. This is for the person who's not fully utilizing the space in their facility and they feel like they can be maximized and get better to get a better return on their investment and get more profits. This is also for the person who may have had multiple harvests that underperformed, where you miss your yields and you don't want to continue to lose money and burn capital. This is for you. This is also for the person that's concerned about, again, not maximizing their facility, not maximizing their potential. This is also for the person that may have already had some success and wants to build and create more success off the success they've already had. This is for the person who wants to run a thriving cultivation, but also wants to continue to have a thriving personal life. Running a cultivation is time consuming, so you really want to do it in a way where you can run your cultivation and still have a life outside of it. This is also for the person who is worried about keeping their cultivation facility compliance. You don't want to get shut down or cited for any compliance reporting issues. This presentation is for you. Stick around. And last but not least, this is for the cultivator who might be worried about losing their cultivation because bigger cultivators, bigger facilities are coming into the scene. And you want to be able to survive. This presentation is for you. Please stick around. And who's this presentation not for? It's not for all figured out Philip or Phyllis who isn't open-minded. It's not for you. Sorry. And it's not for the cultivator who isn't concerned about profitability, quality, or sustainability. So if those things are not important to you, you can go ahead and click off. Sorry, this presentation isn't for you. And so before we get into it, the core assumptions are that you can scale your operation 2x over the next 12 months with the right cultivation strategy. The reason why many commercial grows fail is they don't have an effective implementation of the right cultivation strategy for their facility. So in this presentation, I'm going to go ahead and clear that up so we all know what to do. And who am I? So who am I to talk about 2xing your cultivation and all these things? You're probably wondering that. So my name is Ron. I come from a background in business to business. So I became a business to business expert, selling solutions into businesses that would help them reduce cost and essentially make more money. Did that for about 7+ years for a few publicly traded companies. And through that whole process, I also learned how to run grow operations. So I spent 8+ years running commercial grow facilities under Proposition 215 and under Proposition 64. Those are two completely different legal frameworks that took place here in California that impacted the way you run a commercial grow significantly. So I've had the opportunity to grow under two different legal frameworks, as many cultivators are growing in different states with different legal environments. I've had experience in many different legal environments. so I know how to navigate. I've also invested my own money in commercial cultivation facilities and made mistakes that I was able to learn from, and mistakes that I want to save you from. I've also been able to scale my commercial cultivation 1,600% since my first commercial cultivation, and had some great success outputting amazing flower and high quality, and maximizing those yields per year and maximizing that square footage. I've experienced firsthand the need on a macro and micro level to have systems in place to manage your facility and keep things tight and in order. I've also had the pleasure of studying full stack web development and technology at UCLA EXT, and founded GrowLens back in 2018. Since then, we've been able to work with 200 plus commercial cultivation facilities across over 5 states. So it's been an awesome run. We've had the opportunity to work with some of these brands that you may recognize across, again, 5 states and nationwide, that have been awesome to work with, and we've been able to help out in their commercial cultivation endeavors. So let's hop into it. The first thing you want to do in 2xing your commercial cultivation is establish a cultivation strategy and philosophy that's conducive to your facility goals. So you have to look at your facility, your goals. You have to go inside and be a little introspective here and think about how you prioritize quality, how you prioritize things like sustainability, how you prioritize profitability. That's all important, and that's all going to impact every decision you make in your facility, including decisions like how you maximize your canopy, your flowering canopy in your facility. There's many techniques. So how you prioritize these things is going to impact how you do that in your facility. How you approach how many harvests you have per year and your harvest frequency. How you approach your inputs, whether you're going to do organic methods or more synthetic inorganic methods. How are you going to handle the water usage in your facility? Closed loop water system that allows you to recycle some of the water? Are you going to do a drain to waste? Or do you want to do a hybrid method that kind of takes in both? This all comes into play. Also, how are you going to use your energy in your facility? Are you going to be using LED? Are you an LED facility? Are you a HID, more traditional facility? How efficient are you in your energy consumption? These all play a factor. And also, you want to look at your specific facility's limitations and opportunities. Every facility might have limitation, and every facility might have opportunity to grow. So you really want to take a step and look at all of these things and create the perfect cultivation strategy and philosophy for your facility. You also want to look at what's your mission. This industry is really hard to get into. It's going to take a lot of force to break into it. Why are you doing all these things? So really understanding all of these things will only help you when it comes to 2xing and scaling your facility. So here I just want to look at a few growth strategies and methodologies that are out there. The first one is the most common one we see on the market. It's a very high profitability strategy, a very high quality strategy, but kind of moderate to low on the sustainability side. This is an LED grow facility who has very good light efficiency, low energy consumption. They're growing in Rockwell cubes, the 6x6 Rockwell cubes, they're very low labor. So when it comes to repotting plants and storing soil, Rockwell is going to take the cake. It's going to be easy to store. It's going to be easy to get out there. So it really helps on your profitability when it comes to labor costs. But there's no way to recycle or reuse Rockwell. So you really lose out on the sustainability aspect. You're filling up some landfill somewhere with those Rockwell cubes. But again, this is a very high profitable and high quality strategy. This will also be implementing a high plant density, so you don't have to veg as long to fill your canopy space. Filling your canopy is a very key component, and really utilizing all the square footage in your facility is going to be paramount in maximizing your harvest per year and 2xing your facility. This strategy also uses dry salts. So dry salts are very profitable because you don't get watered down nutrients that you get when you're running liquid nutrients. So by mixing your own dry salts and making your own concentrates is very highly profitable. And this facility is an automated facility, so they're able to really maximize their water usage by watering in a very strategic way and making sure their plants get the exact dosage of water exactly when they need it, which is hard to really do when you're on a manual watering schedule. The next thing I want to highlight, the growth strategy number 3, is a very highly sustainable growth strategy. If you're really into doing things sustainably, you really want to, really care for the environment out there, and you really want to grow high quality product, this strategy might be conducive to you. This is another LED lighting facility. This is not only a soil facility, but it's a living soil facility in soil beds. By having soil beds, you're able to reuse the same soil over and over again. You don't have to worry about disposing of hundreds or thousands of pounds of soil. It's all there, and the soil even gets better between each harvest because it's living. You're putting compost teas, beneficial bacteria. You're running cover crops to really bolster the soil food web and really creating the ideal optimal environment for your plants. This is also a dry organic facility, so the nutrients and organic inputs are typically dry and organic, except for when you're using the teas. You're taking those dry organic nutrients, you're putting them in a tea form, and you're inoculating that into the soil. So this one is very highly sustainable, very high quality, and moderately low to profitability. So this is a strategy we really like as well. So growth strategy number 3 is awesome if you're really looking to have something sustainable. So the second thing you want to do is make sure your environment is optimal. So you're only as good as in your environment. Many cultivators already know this. So in order to make sure your environment is optimal, you want to make sure you just do a quick check and calculate the efficacy of the equipment you have in place. You might not just have the right equipment to begin with. So we've put some very specific math you can do to just quickly ensure your equipment is good to go. So on the first one, we have your HVAC heating and cooling capacity, where we take your total wattage, we divide that by 1,000 watts, and we multiply that by half ton, because typically a half ton of AC cooling is necessary to cool 1,000 watts. So in your facility with 20 lights, 600 watt LEDs, that's 12,000 watts total. We divide that by 1,000 and multiply that by a half a ton. What do we get? We get 6 tons of cooling capacity necessary to cool that particular flowering room or flowering zone or room in your facility. So just quick math you can do. The same thing is necessary when it comes to your humidification capacity and keeping your environment the correct humidity. So we typically just take we factor in your gallons per day and your drainage runoff. So we take your gallons per day and we subtract that by your gallons per day, multiply it by your drainage runoff percentage, and we multiply that by 8 to convert it to pints. So a quick example is a facility that waters 50 gallons per day and has about 15% runoff would be about 340 pint facility. So you would need a 340 pint dehumidification capacity at least to properly regulate the humidity in that environment. So now that we have the correct HVAC and cooling, Then we have the correct humidity. Then we want to look at your vapor pressure deficit. So your vapor pressure deficit is very key. You're going to need to control and monitor this to the T. So here we have a beautiful graph that talks about your vapor pressure deficit and the level it needs to be at based off of the phase of the growth cycle it's in. So your vapor pressure deficit measures how fast the plant perspires, how fast it takes up nutrition. So it's very key and it's very hyper specific. So for example, in the early growth stage, you want to have a VPD of 0.55 or 0.48 to 0.77. In order to achieve that, it takes a certain humidity and a certain level of temperature. And that will change during the phase of the growth cycle. So it's constantly changing every couple weeks. So you want to have a controller that allows you to manage your humidity and temperature simultaneously. This will allow you to optimize VPD based on the phase of the growth cycle so your plants can be optimal and really thrive in your facility. The next thing you want to do is make sure your irrigation system can uphold a rigorous feeding schedule. So one of the more popular things we've seen out there is the crop steering methodology. So the crop steering methodology strategically changes the factors related to your plant's watering contents based off the phase of the growth cycle you're in. So for example, if you're in a vegetative phase, you're going to want lower EC, higher water content, lower VPD, and maybe lower light intensity. However, if you're in a generative or flowering phase, you want higher light intensity, higher VPD, bigger drybacks, lower content, and higher EC. So here's a little chart right below that shows you veg, higher water content, higher feeding durations, higher feeding frequency. But when you're in generative or flowering, you want to do lower water content, lower feeding durations, and lower feeding frequencies so you can achieve that bigger dryback in your grow facility. Here's a quick chart showing the crop steering methodology. Here at the top, you have a line that measures your water content percentage or your water saturation percentage. And here you have when the lights come on in your facility, and here you have when the lights come off in your facility. So you have a very kind of rigorous spike and drop off, spike and drop off, spike and drop off. So this is allowing your plants to be watered in a very specific way. And through this whole process, you're measuring your pH percentage, you're measuring your EC, and you're measuring the amount of water you give your plants. So it's a lot of factors that go into play when you're talking about irrigation. So you want to make sure you have an irrigation system that allows you to evenly distribute the water to your plants. You want to be able to control your feeding frequencies and durations, and you also want to monitor your dryback percentages. So you really want to be able to need these things to really optimize your plant's feeding schedule and irrigation. The next thing you want to be able to do is establish the right SOPs for your facility. Every facility is a little bit different, so your SOPs will vary, but by having the right SOPs, this really breaks down each and every task in your facility to maximize the output of each phase of the growth process on your facility. So you've built this beautiful cultivation facility. This is the handbook. This is the instructions. This is the success handbook that will protect your return on investment. You gotta have it. Even if you're a highly experienced cultivator who's won lots of cannabis cups, you're growing really good flower, you're having success, you still need to have these SOPs in place. Trust me, you need to have this to be successful. You need to have this handbook. You need to have this anchor in your facility to really ensure your success. You always can adjust it as you go along and as you see fit, but you have to have your SOPs in place. And here's a quick example of the sections you'll find in an SOP. So you'll find things like how to manage decontamination. This is key. Um, you don't want to know how many times we see facilities fail because they don't have proper decontamination protocols, and they're growing things like mold and pests are thriving in their facility, and your plants don't like that. The next thing you want to look at is, how you're curing and watering your plants and managing your pest management, IPM protocols. You want to put that and make sure that's captured in your SOPs. And the last thing is how you're handling compliance when it comes to things like metric that might be out there, or other compliance protocols that are in your state. You want to make sure these are captured in your SOPs. And the most efficient way of handling these things is documenting. So a way to do this is you want to make sure you consult with specialists or expertise depending on the area. So most cultivators have a general understanding of these things, but it helps to consult with experts. There's expert IPM managers out there that provide insight that you might not have. So when you draft up these SOPs, you want to consult with expertise on specific areas to make sure you have the best SOPs and the best handbook possible to protect your return on investment and 2x your cultivation facility. The next thing you want to do is make sure you map out your production calendar that maximizes harvest per year. So a production calendar is very specific. It maps out how your facility looks at a high level, and I'll get into the process of creating it. But in your production calendar, you want to make sure you're including things like when to de-leaf, when to do IPM, when to decontaminate. So we're kind of building off your SOP. We're taking from your SOPs and we're calendarizing that data, and really putting it in a format that's understandable and actionable. So a couple things that I highlighted is when to harvest, when to clone or add new plants, and when to destroy, and when to change plants phase. So these actions are red because they directly impact your harvest per year, your harvest frequency, the movement of plants in your facility. They also have a big impact on compliance. So these are really things you want to pay attention to. When you're building your production calendar, you also want to document what team member is responsible for that task or what title. You also want to document what room that's supposed to take place in, or zone in your facility or area. You also want to document the date, the time, and frequency. So this production calendar is really detailed, and it's really going to help you not miss a beat in your facility. So you might ask, how do I know how frequently to implement new plants or cut clones or add plants in your facility? So you want to establish a predictable and collective benchmark of plant movement in your facility based off the flowering area. So the flowering areas pretty much are the drivers of your facility. When you're harvesting in those areas are the drivers of your facility. So a quick foolproof method to calculate how the plant movement in your facility is going to be here, which we calculate your cohort creation frequency. So this is how frequently you're adding in a new plant cohort based off your flowering area. So a quick example of this is we have a 2 flowering zone facility that is harvesting every 9 weeks. We just simply divide those two things, and we're able to find a cohort creation frequency of 4.5 weeks, or roughly 33 days. So in calculating your cohort creation frequency, you take your flowering weeks, you divide that by flowering zones, and you have the frequency in which you should be creating plants and moving plants in your facility. So the example here we have on the right, the first thing is creating plants. So this would happen every 33 days. Then they're destroying or splitting off plants. Then they're moving to a veg phase, and then destroying and splitting off plants, moving into a flowering phase, and then harvesting. So this is the cycle that each flowering room will ultimately go through. And again, if you have a 2-zone flowering facility, you're harvesting every 9 weeks. You will be creating a new cohort every 33 and a half days. This equation is very adjustable based off your facility and how many flowering zones you have and how many flowering weeks on your strain. So when creating this production calendar, there's really two methods. You can start from the bottom up, which is looking at what you need to be doing on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, on an annual basis, and really kind of mapping out how each day looks in your facility, each week, each month, each year. Or you can start by looking at the year. What do you want to accomplish? And then you kind of go down on what your month will look like, what your week will look like, and what your day will look like. So ultimately, you want to outline the activity that's in your SOPs in this production calendar and make sure it's very detailed and your whole team has visibility so everybody's on the same page. So once you have all these things, you have to establish a system to communicate, verify, and track all the activities on your production calendar based off your SOPs. So all the time and energy you put into putting together SOPs in a production calendar will completely go to waste if you don't have a system in place to hold people accountable and have that visibility. So having a good accountability system will help you determine if you're off track or on track before harvest time comes. So the last thing you want to happen is to get to a harvest and realize that you're missing the ball. You want to know that ahead of time. You want to know that in real time so you can do what's necessary to get your facility on track. So you want to have some type of system, a platform to manage that process for you, to make sure your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed. The next thing, and this is one of my favorite areas, is running verified genetics at scale only. I can never stress this enough. Run verified genetics at scale only. I see this all the time. I see cultivators and grow owner operators get caught up in so many other things, and they don't plan properly and end up running. They built this facility, they've done all these things, and they end up just running whatever genetics they could find, because that's what they could find, and they end up losing out on yields. They lose out on performance because they didn't run verified genetics. And this is how you run verified genetics. You want to make sure you're researching your genetics every 90 days at least prior to the point where they need to go in your garden. You need to have at least that time period so you can source properly. You can understand things like your supplier, where are these genetics coming from, what nursery or seed bank are they coming from. You really want to have peer-reviewed genetics that have been grown by people you trust, that have vetted these out. You also want to look up your genetic history lineage, where it comes from. Was it a land race, or where does it derive from? Do your best to really understand these things before you put this genetic in your facility. And even better, if you can get a certificate of analysis, you can see the finished product. You really want to understand all of these things. And one of my favorite ways to verify genetics is to test it out yourself in your facility. This is one of the best ways to do it, but don't do it at scale. Do it on less than 5% in your canopy and dedicate the rest of your canopy square footage towards genetics that are verified. So only make sure you're running verified genetics, please, I beg you, if you want to have a successful grow facility. The next thing is to run end of harvest reviews every harvest. So after each and every harvest, you want to have a sit down with your team and you want to review what happened. So you want to compare data points across all harvest cohorts and genetics. So you want to look at obvious data points like yield, total yield, really like tracking your average yield per plant. And then you also want to look at your sales data. You want to cross-reference that with your price per unit and buyer trends. Looking for things like what buyers are buying what, and really understanding the trends in how your product is selling, as well as how your product is performing from a yield perspective. So you really want to look at these things, and you also want to do a track and look at your environmental historical data, historical temp, historical humidity, historical VPD. You also want to look at your activity historical data, your treatments, when you pruned, how was your feeding schedule like? So by looking at these historical data points, it really gives you more perspective, and you really want to really drill into the outliers. So if you had a harvest that was really high performing or really low performing, those are the ones you really want to do a very deep dive into, and looking at the historical data and how those things transpired. So you evaluate what went well, what didn't, and areas of opportunity in each category. I just threw a quote in here from the late, great Kobe Bryant that says, "I'm reflective in the sense that I learned to move forward. I'm reflective with purpose." So here we reflect and we learn and we reflect with purpose, which brings us to the last but not least way to ensure you 2x your cultivation is make incremental investment into optimization and expansion. So based off that harvest review you just did, you strategically invest in expansion. That could be adding infrastructure or simply tweaking a couple things in your facility. So by doing that end of harvest review, you're able to quickly determine where you need to make the investments or the expansion. What you want to target is 25% growth or improvement every 90 days. So ask yourself, what do we need to do to grow 25% every 3 months? And if you do that over time, you will have a facility that has 2x'd in less than 12 months. And avoid making too many changes at once. We want to employ the scientific method. So if you make too many changes, you won't have, it'll be harder to determine what changes affected what. Only make a lot of changes if things went really bad and you really need to do something drastic. But if you're just tweaking it, you want to use the scientific method, which is having one control and 2 variables. So here's a quick summary of the process to 2x your cultivation over the next 12 months. You want to establish a cultivation strategy and philosophy that fits your facility. You want to ensure your grow environment is optimal and stable. You want to ensure your irrigation system is sufficient to uphold your feeding requirements. You want to establish SOP'S, breaking down each task necessary to maximize the output of your facility based off the phase of the plants. You want to make sure you establish a production calendar, breaking down the timeline of plant movement in your facility on a monthly, weekly, daily basis. You also want to establish a system to verify and track all activity on your production calendar that is based off your standard operating procedures. So without the system, all that work you did is going to fall on deaf ears. There's going to be no way to determine you're accountable, keep people accountable. So you got to have that system. The 7th is acquire and run only reliable genetics at scale. Cannot stress that enough. At scale, it's okay to run genetics that you might not be sure about, but don't run them at scale. Run only ones that you verified and went through the process we've highlighted earlier. The next is leverage data to make adjustments to the previous steps. So you do your end of harvest review and you figure out what went well, what didn't, your areas of opportunity, and you really do a deep dive into outliers. So the harvests that were really high performing or really low performing, those are the ones you want to do a deep dive into. And last but not least is strategically investing in 25% growth every 90 days. So you want to take a look based off of your end of harvest review and see how you should allocate and strategically invest in that 25% growth. It can be infrastructure or it can be tweaking environmental set points. So that end of harvest review is going to expose exactly what you need to do. So there's two ways to achieve this. There's option one, which is the tough route. This requires you to spend additional time and money experimenting with cultivation strategy that may not fit your facility. This is trial and error. This is installing manual environmental readers that may have limited control or require multiple apps to operate. This is potentially falling short of your yield because your environment equipment was insufficient. This is not having SOPs and winging it based off of limited knowledge of a grow owner operator. This is sitting down and drafting your own SOPs through hours of research and limited knowledge, or partnering with it or hiring an expert that's going to want a big fee or large equity. This is purchasing generic SOPs or downloading them off the internet that are very genetic. They're not peer reviewed. They don't configure to your grow strategy or facility. This is putting in a system using a handwritten or digital calendar that you have to manually create with limited ability to track task completion and track the specifics of your grow facility to maximize your harvest. This is hiring another person or hiring a manager that is going to build out more spreadsheets and handwritten logs to track the progress of your facility. This is hiring developers or data scientists to build an in-house solution that needs to be maintained and upkept. This is using a system that's not a good fit for your company and needs or strategy, so it's not custom for your company and your grow facility. This is waiting to the last minute to figure out genetics, so they get any plants they can from any place they can find. So this is unvetted plant genetics that end up in your facility, resulting in loss of productivity. This is gathering data from multiple sources to determine and building a spreadsheet to track harvest. So this is the tough route. This is a lot of steps that go into this, or we can streamline things. So this is the simple way. You can reach out to GrowLens. We'll make sure you have a cultivation strategy, an environmental plan, an irrigation plan that fits your facility needs. We'll make sure we help you implement SOPs, a production calendar, and we'll give you a whole platform that really helps you manage your execution of your production calendar and SOPs, helps you stay on top of compliance, and we'll help you source peer-reviewed genetics. We have a robust network, and we'll help you access genetics that are peer-reviewed and access a harvest review dashboard that will support expansion. So just by putting the data, you'll be able to review those harvests at the end, be able to quickly see what you need to do and move on. So this is the optimal route, and this is what you can achieve with GrowLens. So again, who is this presentation for? This is for the cultivation facility who spent $250K on their grow facility or more and looking to maximize a return on investment. Your build out took longer and was more expensive than you expected. You need to get a return ASAP. You're not fully utilizing your space and your facility. You want to look for opportunities to maximize your space, maybe something you haven't seen, and you've had multiple or maybe even consecutive runs where you missed your yield target. So this presentation is for you. If you are concerned about not maximizing the potential of your grow facility, this presentation is for you. If you want to maintain and build off the success you've already had, really solidify that success, this presentation is for you. If you want to run a thriving cultivation while also having a personal life, this presentation is for you. We want to help you do both. And if you're worried about keeping your grow facility compliant, we can definitely help out with that. You want to avoid citations and fines, this presentation is for you. And last but not least, if you're worried about losing your cultivation because bigger owner-operators are coming onto the scene and you want to make sure you're ready and you can grow and scale, this presentation is for you. So again, we worked with 200 plus grow facilities across 5 different states, some really big brands that we've been able to work with. I want to highlight Robert with Dumbold Industries, who has an indoor cultivation in Oklahoma, who helped save over $54,000 a year by taking tasks that formerly took him weeks and condensed those down just to a few hours for him. Also want to highlight Ronnie with Astoria Growers, who has another indoor cultivation facility who helped increase productivity by 110% in a 12-month period. The graph behind is representing the big increase in yield he saw. And I also want to highlight Shadana, who's the COO of Exotic Flowers, another indoor cultivation who increased productivity by 300% in just a 6-month period. Again, you have a graph showing the big impact it had on yields. And for a handful of testimonials, we have Ronnie, Astoria Grower, said when they first started with Growlands, there were only a 100 plant facility. Now they're up to a 1,200 plant facility, and Growlands was a key component to helping them scale. Zong Vang said a lot of areas have improved with Growlands, and they've been able to track everything that's happening in the business. And Dylan from THC Design said, we've been through quite a few programs and nothing worked well with multiple licenses. Once they saw Growlands, it made it super simple and easy to operate. So, thanks for joining. The next steps will be to book a call today. You'll either be speaking with myself or one of our highly trained specialists, and we'll be talking soon. Thanks for joining.